Begins media number 2, the deposition of Joseph Bianco Dio. On the record, time is 11:18 a.m.
Doctor, you ready to continue?
Yes, sir.
Now, before we took a break, I was talking with you a little bit about your practice. I want to come back to that. I want to show you Exhibit 6. It's my understanding that that's the insurance coverage you have, or a copy of the policy that you have for the work related to Mrs. Mejia's, the time frame of her care. Is that, to your understanding, your insurance policy?
Yes, sir.
Are you aware of any other insurance coverage other than what's reflected in Exhibit 6 that might pertain to the actions involved in this case?
Would you repeat that?
Sure. Other than what I've showed you at Exhibit 6, are you aware of any other insurance policies that might provide you coverage
No,
if you're
sir.
found liable for anything involved in Mrs. Mejia's care?
No, sir.
All right. Do you currently have insurance for the medical work you do?
Yes, sir.
Is it the same policy?
It's a continuation of that policy.
Okay. Now, when we were talking before the break, we were talking about your current activity. Let me summarize and get us back onto our questioning. You do not currently have privileges to admit patients to any hospital in Texas, true?
No, yes, sir.
Do you have privileges to practice medicine in any state outside of Texas?
Yes, I carry a license in Missouri.
Have you any privileges to admit patients in Missouri?
No, sir.
Any other states beyond Missouri and Texas?
No, sir.
Now, with respect to surgeries, the last one you performed was the surgery that we're here on, the case that we're involved in with Mrs. Mejia.
Surgery in the hospital. Yes, sir.
Okay. The last laparoscopic cholecystectomy that you performed was on Mrs. Mejia, correct?
Yes, sir.
The last hospital that you had privileges to admit any patient to was the Crescent Medical Center in Lancaster, true?
Yes, sir.
And there, however, that was for emergency room patients.
Yes, sir.
What was the last hospital you had privileges to perform any kind of general surgical procedure at?
University General.
Why were those privileges revoked?
I do not know, sir.
When were they revoked?
June 27th, 2014.
And that was in the course of the care for Mrs. Mejia, correct?
Yes, sir.
Who revoked them?
The hospital.
Who at the hospital?
I was notified by a Dr. Shada,
Who is,
Chief of Staff.
who is Dr. Shada?
Chief of Staff.
And how did he notify you that your privileges were revoked?
Telephone call
When did he call you?
at approximately 4:30 p.m. June 27th.
And when Dr. Shada called you, what did he tell you was the reason your privileges were going to be revoked?
He did not give me a reason.
Had your privileges been revoked from other hospitals?
No, sir.
Given that this was the first time, did you ask Dr. Shade why your privileges were being revoked from this hospital?
I was caught by surprise, and I didn't think to ask.
Did you ask anyone else?
No, sir.
To this day, you've never asked anyone why your privileges were revoked at University General Hospital, Dallas,
And
correct?
Let me just instruct.
Other than your lawyer.
Well, and I just I can finish.
Sure, sorry.
Outside of any kind of peer review or anything that you've had counsel do on your behalf. Okay?
Okay.
So let me make my question
Yeah.
clear to take care of, and I should have, thank you, Russ, because
Yeah.
I didn't. Outside of a peer review context or your lawyers telling you why, I'm going to put that aside. They have a privilege to discuss things with you. I don't want to invade. Outside of that, in your day-to-day work, relationships, discussions, have you asked anyone why your privileges were revoked at University General Hospital?
No, sir.
Why?
I, number one, didn't know who to ask. I waited for the opportunity of peer review or fair hearing.
Have you ever petitioned anyone to reinstate your privileges at University General Hospital?
And let me step in here.
Outside of the peer review context?
And I'll just, I did.
Okay,
I wrote a letter on his behalf,
okay.
so to kind of cut to the,
Yeah, let me figure out how to deal with that. Is that something, Russ, that you'll produce, or is that, you follow? I
well,
don't wanna
okay,
invade-
let's go off the record real quick, and I
yeah.
can, yeah.
Off the record, 11:25 a.m. Back on the record, 11:25 a.m.
All right, so, other than what we've just talked about with your lawyer, have you made any effort yourself, outside of a peer review context, to have your privileges reinstated at University General Hospital before it closed?
No, sir.
Have you applied for privileges for general surgical type work at any hospital other than University General?
Yes, sir.
Where has that been?
Crescent Medical Center.
Were those privileges granted?
No, sir.
Why not?
And I'll instruct you not to answer that question based on peer review.
Well, Crescent is separate from UGH, true?
Yes, sir.
When did you apply to Crescent for general surgical privileges?
I was asked in May or June of 2014 to apply.
And was that application denied?
Yes, sir.
Were you ever given a reason why it was denied?
And I'll instruct you not to answer that because that's peer review and credentialing information, which is privileged.
Has any other hospital, have you made any effort to apply to any other hospital other than Crescent for general surgical privileges?
No.
Why not?
Those were the hospital is in close proximity to my home, and I could respond to emergency room and surgical cases.
So is it your testimony that other hospitals in the Dallas area are not close enough to your home to where you would want to apply for general surgical privileges?
Yes, sir. I chose not to apply to Charlton.
So with respect to UGH, when Dr. Sade called you on the 27th while you were still in charge of caring for Mrs. Mejia, he only told you that your privileges were revoked but didn't state any reason why, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you, when told your privileges were being revoked, which came as a complete surprise to you, didn't ask Dr. Sade, who was the first doctor apparently to ever revoke your privileges at a hospital, why that action was being taken, true?
Yes, sir.
And since then, other than with your lawyer, since then you've not talked to any other individual about why your privileges at University General Hospital were revoked, correct?
Correct.
And no one's communicated to you in writing or text or email or any other fashion why your privileges at University General Hospital were revoked, correct?
And just with the instruction, you can answer that outside of any peer review correspondence.
Okay,
Is that true?
yes.
Now, we deposed on Monday Dr. Franchell Richard Hamilton. Do you know who that is?
Yes, sir.
And she related in her deposition sworn testimony that she was told you had been involved in a prior, that she classified it as an unfortunate incident with another laparoscopic cholecystectomy patient that resulted in a colonic injury earlier that month.
Yes, sir.
Are you aware of that?
Yes, sir.
What is that case? I don't want the patient's name or any protected health information, but I want to know generally what was going on with that patient.
It was a mentally retarded male who had a long history of constipation, who had gallbladder disease and symptomatology.
And what was the colonic injury that occurred?
The trocar at the umbilicus was inserted in the colon.
Who did that?
I did,
Why did you do that?
because the colon was distended and filled with stool.
What was the injury to the patient?
Because the colon was perforated, we opened the abdomen and performed what is called a Hartmann procedure.
Did Dr. Silver assist you with this procedure?
Yes, he did.
And what was the outcome to the patient?
The patient was doing fine. I don't know what happened because when removed from the gallbladder case of Miss Mejia, that was turned over to Dr. Hamilton.
So this other patient, and I'll refer to him as the colonic injury patient, if that helps.
That's fine.
The colonic injury patient was transferred to Dr. Hamilton, or are you referring to Mrs. Mejia?
No. The patient was in the intensive care unit and transferred to Dr. Hamilton's care.
And again, the patient, when you're referring to the patient, that is to the colonic injury patient, true?
Yes, sir.
And when was that transfer done? Was this June 27th?
Yes, sir, it would have been the same day.
When was the injury to the colon for the colonic injury patient? When did that procedure occur?
Can't tell you, sir.
Sometime in June?
Yes, sir.
Was it in close proximity to the 27th, or weeks or months or days earlier?
About 10 days.
And what happened to that patient?
I don't know, sir.
Did that patient survive the injury?
As far as I know, the patient survived.
Do you know when the patient was transferred to, I'm sorry, do you know who transferred the patient to Dr. Hamilton?
Dr. Shada,
And what's your basis for that?
when he removed me from having staff privileges, that care was also transferred to Dr. Hamilton.
Now, is that something Dr. Sade told you, or is that an assumption you've made?
Dr. Shada did not refer to that patient, but when he removed me, all care in that hospital was transferred.
And what's your basis for understanding that all care in the hospital was transferred to Dr. Hamilton? That's what I'm trying to figure out.
Dr. Shada told me that I was losing my privileges and being removed or suspended from care of patients at UGH until peer review or fair hearing carried out.
So did Dr. Sade at that time tell you that Dr. Hamilton was assuming care of your patients?
Yes, sir.
What words did Dr. Sade use to convey that?
When he called me, he told me that my privileges were being removed and that Dr. Hamilton was covering.
Did Dr. Sade indicate that Dr. Hamilton was covering all of your patients or a specific patient?
He did not say that. He said that I was being removed from staff, could not attend to my patients, and Dr. Hamilton was covering.
Other than Mrs. Mejia and the colonic injury patient, did you have any other patients currently in the hospital?
No, sir.
So the patients that Dr. Hamilton would have been assuming care of would have been the colonic injury patient
Yes,
and
sir.
Mrs. Mejia.
Yes.
Had you, at this point on the 27th of June, had you recently completed any surgical work for other patients other than these two?
I would have to go back and look. I cannot tell you. Those were the two patients in the hospital at that time.
When Dr. Sade, am I saying that right?
Shada?
Shada? When Dr. Shada told you that he was revoking your privileges, did he mention that both the colonic injury patient and Mrs. Mejia were part of the reason for that action?
No, sir.
Did he have any discussion with you about either of those two cases in relationship to removing your privileges?
No, sir.
Did you make any assumptions about either of those two cases being involved in the decision to revoke your privileges?
No, sir.
Was this call made to you after the second procedure you performed on Mrs. Mejia?
Yes, sir.
Was that call made to you after you understood that the right hepatic artery had been bleeding?
Yes.
Was that after you had performed the second procedure on Mrs. Mejia and discussed with other care providers that the right hepatic artery had been bleeding?
Yes, sir.
Do you have any understanding of whether or not Dr. Shada knew that Mrs. Mejia's right hepatic artery was bleeding after your second procedure and before the phone call to you about your privileges?
That I do not know.
In other words, did he discuss with you at all Mrs. Mejia's condition at the time?
No.
How long was the phone call between yourself and Dr. Shada on this call where your privileges were revoked from the hospital?
Approximately 2 or 3 minutes.
Was there anyone else present that overheard the conversation on your end?
I cannot remember, sir.
Do you know where the call was, where you received the call?
I believe I was at home.
Do you maintain any records of phone calls where your bill reflects what time you would have received a phone call like that?
No, sir.
Were you on call at any time for University General Hospital?
No, sir.
I've seen a call sheet, which is why I want to ask, that indicates that, let me just find it. Of course not. There it is. Let me show you Exhibit 7. Have you ever seen that page? Here you go.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. Have you ever seen that, sir?
No, sir.
Do you recognize any of the handwriting at the bottom?
I don't recognize the phone call.
Do you know anything about this type of document and how it would be used at University General?
It was to allow the emergency room, the floors, and surgery, ICU, to know who to call if there was a problem.
And the notation at the bottom, can you read that?
This was on the 29th. Do not, per house supervisor, do not call Bianco due to suspended privileges.
Do you recognize that phone number at the bottom, the 888?
No, I do not.
Did you ever receive call, like the doctors that might be indicated on this chart would receive call?
Please say that in a different fashion.
Let me back up. So if I understand your recollection of what this document number 7 would be, it's a list that would be utilized by the hospital staff for doctors to call for particular issues, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you were never part of the general call where you would have been listed for University General Hospital. Is that true?
That's true.
Do you have any idea why someone would have made the notation not to call you due to suspended privileges on a chart like this?
As you can see, on June 25th, Dr. Hamilton was on call. Miss Mejia was in the emergency room. The nurses in the emergency room and Dr. Dralvis Edwards told me that no one was on call. Would I come and attend to the patient?
Objection, non-responsive.
You need to listen to this question.
Yeah, okay, but we've...
I'm sorry.
No, please, it's the lawyer's way of doing things. You're not doing anything wrong, and they make objections. It doesn't mean anything you're doing wrong or anybody's doing wrong. It's preserving error for the judge to decide upon later. So don't take it personally in any way, shape, or form. And I appreciate your effort to communicate with us, okay? But Tim's doing his job and it not reflecting on your answer, okay? But let me make sure I understand, because I think we've gone into a new area here. You were just looking at Exhibit 7 and telling me that on the day Mrs. Mejia first presented, she presented to the emergency room.
Yes, sir.
And if the way things would work, if I'm understanding what you were saying earlier, she normally would have been presented to Dr. Hamilton as a patient.
Yes, sir.
What's the basis for why you would say that?
Because her name is on that schedule.
So when we look at Exhibit 7, on the 25th of June, it's got Dr. Hamilton crossed out, but also written in for that date. Is that, I'm sorry, I took it away from you and then I came back to it. So if you look on the 25th,
I can't tell you why it was crossed out, sir.
Listen to this question.
sure.
Okay, I'm
And
sorry.
I appreciate that. So on the 25th, though, if I'm understanding you correctly, if Mrs. Mejia presented to the emergency room, the way you understand Exhibit 7, she should have become Dr. Hamilton's patient.
Yes, sir.
But what actually did happen?
I was called at around 6:30 that there was no one on call. They had a lady in the emergency room with acute gallbladder disease. Would I come and see her? I did.
So with respect to this call on the 25th, do you recall who was it that that made that communication to you? Who called you?
Dr. Dralvis Edwards.
She's going to ask you to spell that. I will too.
Dralves Edwards.
Dralvis. I've never heard of him.
Dio,
Okay. And who was that individual?
an emergency room physician.
And did he indicate to you, what did he indicate to you about his efforts to locate Dr. Hamilton?
He said that there was no one, or he was told there was no one on call.
Now, is that the way it worked there, that there would be no one on call?
Objection form.
The situation changed over 2014. I can't speak to it.
Well, I guess I'm curious and confused. The way I understood it was that Exhibit 7 reflected the call sheet for the doctors, the general surgical doctors on call for the hospital on specific days during this month.
Yes, sir.
And that if I understood some discovery responses, it was that if a patient came in the emergency room needing general surgical coverage, there were doctors on staff or there were doctors retained by employment agreements with the hospital to provide that coverage.
Yes, sir.
And that on the date of this first presentation by Mrs. Mejia, that would have been Dr. Hamilton.
Yes, sir.
But for some reason, you're telling me now that Dr. Edwards called and said there was no doctor on call that day.
He was informed there was no one on call.
Okay. Would that have been the way, or was that something that would have, in your experience there, been unusual?
I knew nothing about Dr. Alexander and Hamilton covering exclusively the emergency room until later.
Okay.
Objection unresponsive.
From 1985, when that hospital opened, I had been called numerous times, whether on call or not, to cover.
So in the past, you had been called because of your proximity to the hospital?
Because I would accept the call and go in.
So for example, if we were to get general call sheets like what we have in Exhibit 7 for some prior date, would your name have been listed?
Let's say prior to 2014, I would think. I never kept the call list, so I can't tell you.
Then what happened in that 2014 timeframe that you just referenced, where that would change?
From what I can tell, they signed a contract to cover the emergency room.
And when you say they, is it Dr. Hamilton and Alexander that you
Yes,
worked with?
sir.
And what's your understanding of what that contract was?
I have no knowledge.
What's your source for that information? Where did you come to this understanding? Is it somebody told you about this? Did you read something? Is it something you observed?
I was told they had signed a contract that day that I went to the emergency room, or I was led to believe that.
So who, first off, told you that Drs. Alexander and Hamilton had signed this type of contract to cover general surgical needs for the emergency room?
I cannot tell you that, sir.
What time frame were you told this? Was it in June? Was it sometime prior?
The only thing that I can tell you is that I believe I was told the day that I went to the emergency room.
And would that have been this June 25th day?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And what's your best recollection of what specifically was told to you on the 25th about who was responsible for covering patients for general surgical needs in the emergency room?
Form.
Please repeat that.
Sure. So you arrive at the hospital. What is it you were told by whomever it was about Dr. Alexander and Hamilton's role in providing general surgical services for patients in the emergency room?
They told me that Dr. Hamilton, I believe, stated or someone told the ER that she was not on call. I don't know who did what.
What did you do after receiving that information?
I saw the patient and admitted the patient.
Did you make any effort to contact either Doctors Alexander or Hamilton on your own?
No, sir.
Do you know if anyone else at this time frame on the 25th was trying to carry that out?
You could ask Dr. Edwards or whoever the nurses were in the emergency room.
Do you recall anything else about any description those individuals gave you about their efforts to locate Dr. Hamilton?
No, sir, I do not recall anything.
Did you form any impression as to why Dr. Hamilton was not responding to this call?
Form.
No, sir.
Had someone indicated to you that they had actually tried to call Dr. Hamilton?
I do not know that, sir.
Okay. Prior to this point, on the 25th, had you been called to come see patients in the emergency room for general surgical needs?
In the past, oh yes. During 2014, I can't tell you, I can't remember.
And other than Doctors Edwards and the nurses that you don't remember the names of any of the nurses that might have relayed this information to you, correct?
I was trying to think, and sir, I just don't remember.
Okay. I'm just trying to build a list of potential witnesses that might have been present in your recollection for this part of the conversation. Do you recall anyone else at this time?
No, sir.
Now, after coming into, after the call about Dr. Hamilton, and you saw Mrs. Mejia in the emergency room, did you make the decision to admit her to the hospital?
Yes, sir.
Have you heard the term attending or admitting physician?
Yes, sir.
What does that mean to you?
That is the physician whose name is on the face sheet and is responsible for the patient.
On the 25th of June, who would that have been for
It would
Mrs.
have been
Mejia?
Me.
Did that at any point in time change?
No, sir.
On the 26th of June, who would have been the admitting or attending?
Me.
On the 26th, did that change at all?
No.
On the 27th of June, who would have been the admitting or attending?
Me until 4:30 p.m.
And why do you say that?
Because of the order in the chart and the telephone call.
And we're referencing Dr. Chavez' call.
Yes, sir.
After 4:30, do you have any knowledge of who would have been the admitting or attending physician for Mrs. Mejia?
As far as I knew, it would have been Dr. Hamilton,
And why do you say that?
because they were transferring the care to Dr. Hamilton.
And is that something Dr. Chavez said to you specifically? Dr. Bianco, I'm transferring your two patients to Dr. Hamilton.
He did not mention the colon. He told me that I was being suspended that they were removing my privileges and that Dr. Hamilton would be covering.
Okay. Do you recall anything else about that conversation that we haven't discussed?
Not as far as I know, sir.
Do you recall anything about Dr. Shada's tone?
Sir, I've only spoken to him once or twice, maybe 3 times over the year and a half, or, yeah, about a year and a half.
He's just asking if you recalled the tone of his.
I can't make a tone out.
Okay.
If I,
And I appreciate that. Here's my effort. This is what I'm inquiring about. When he makes this call to you, Dr. Shada is calling to tell you your privileges have been revoked, which I assume is an unusual experience for you, and that your patients are being transferred to another doctor, and that your ability to come on University General Hospital surgical grounds and perform your work has been terminated. What I'm wondering is if you developed any impression based on his conversation, whether he was agitated or calm, or excited or subdued, or anything along those lines, to get a better sense of how that conversation transpired.
no,
Form.
sir.
Okay. Now, after receiving that call from Dr. Shada, you said it lasted about 2-3 minutes. What'd you do next?
I stayed at home.
Who was with you?
My wife,
Did you talk with anyone about what had just happened to you on the phone?
my wife,
Other than her, did you call anyone, Dr. Silver or any other doctors, about what had happened?
I was kind of shocked, so I didn't call anyone.
What'd you do the rest of that day?
I stayed at home for the most part.
How about the following day? Do you remember what you did?
No, sir. I really don't. Wash cars, things like that on a Saturday. Went to church.
And you didn't talk to anyone about this shocking development in your career?
No, sir. I was quite shocked myself.
Did you compose any emails or letters to anyone to challenge Dr. Shada's decision the day before?
I thank God that I do not text or email.
Okay, just answer his questions, okay?
So immediately after losing your privileges, after the initial shock wore off, am I correct, you didn't call anyone or correspond with anyone to find out why your privileges had been revoked or what you could do about it?
Objection form.
No, sir.
And other than your wife, you didn't talk to any doctors, healthcare providers, anyone else at UGH about why your privileges had been revoked?
Form.
Over that weekend, no.
Did you make any assumptions on your part, on reflection after the initial shock wore off, about why your privileges might have been revoked?
Objection form.
Not really, sir. It was shock. I was devastated. That was it.
In other words, had you, on reflection after the initial shock wore off on the day after you received this call, did you say, here were the signs or here were the things that were going on that is why they may have done this?
Form.
No,
Nothing like that at all?
nope,
No, for example, nothing to do with Dr. Alexander or Dr. Hamilton having some relationship with the hospital?
Form.
I didn't know they really had one. I was not privy to it. So, no.
You knew about it on the 25th, though, correct?
Yes, I was told that they had something, a contract, an agreement, And that was the first time I'd ever heard of that.
Sitting here today, outside of communication with your lawyer and things you have in peer review, what's your belief as to why your privileges were revoked?
Objection form.
There was no peer review.
Okay, then, sitting here today, what's your best understanding in your mind that you formulated outside of any conversation you've had with your lawyer about why your privileges were revoked on the 27th of June?
I
form.
do not know.
Have you ever talked with Dr. Hamilton about any of the patients that you were caring for in June of 2014 and their care?
In the late afternoon of June 27th, Dr. Hamilton called me, and I told her the facts of the Mejia case as best I could. I believe I spoke to her on Monday the 30th about the Colden case, if I'm not mistaken.
So, with respect to Mrs. Mejia, on the 27th, after Dr. Sade had called you to say your privileges have been revoked, is it your recollection that on that afternoon you spoke with Dr. Hamilton?
Yes, it was after my privileges were terminated or suspended.
Is it your recollection that that call occurred on the 27th rather than the following day, Saturday the 28th?
Now, I spoke to her on the evening of the 27th, as I remember it, sir.
And do you know what phone you were using to call her?
I believe it was
Objection
my...
form. It's all right, don't worry about,
Yeah.
if you're not supposed to answer something, I'll tell you, otherwise
Okay.
just.
You're
but I-
saying... Oh,
Yeah, but otherwise I gotta get it in, so.
Let me start over again. On the 27th, for the phone call that you're describing between yourself and Dr. Hamilton, do you recall what phone you were using?
yes, my cell phone.
Do you have records of the call?
No, I do not.
Do you know what number you reached or were using to reach, let me back up, for this conversation on the 27th with Dr. Hamilton? Did she call you or did you call her?
As I remember it, she called me.
And do you recall what location she was calling you from? In other words, was it from
No,
a hospital?
I do not know that.
Would your phone at the time have, like mine, when my wife's calling me, flip up the identity of the caller or the number?
Yes, I believe so.
Do you have any recollection of what number showed up when you received this call from Dr. Hamilton?
No, sir.
How long, well, let me back up. With respect to the call from Dr. Hamilton, can you fix in time where that call occurred any better for me other than after Dr. Sade's call to you at around 4:30?
Ask me that again.
Sure, I'm trying to figure out for this call from Dr. Hamilton that you've been telling me about, if you can fix the time frame that that call occurred better for me. Do you recall more specifically what time of day other than late afternoon?
As far as I can tell, if I remember correctly, between 6:30 and 7:30 that evening.
And why do you feel it's between those time frames?
I can't give you a specific answer, sir.
Okay. Do you recall where you physically were when you received the call?
I believe I was at home.
Would you have made any notes or records about the conversation you had with Dr. Hamilton?
No, sir.
Now, with respect to this call between yourself and Dr. Hamilton, do you recall the duration of it? How long it took?
I would like to say approximately 5 or 6 minutes, as I recall.
Do you remember what you discussed with Dr. Hamilton during these 5 or 6 minutes?
I gave her the history of the case, what I had done, what had occurred at the second surgery, and her situation after surgery as we went through the day to 4:30.
So let's go through those things. First off, can you tell me more specifically what was the history you gave Dr. Hamilton about Mrs. Mejia?
That she had come to the emergency room, I was called, I saw her, I admitted her. I did the workup, put her to bed, hydrated her, put her on antibiotics, and kept her no food or drink after midnight, checked her lab the next day, took her to surgery. I believe I told her Dr. Silver helped me, and that she did fine up until about 3 in the morning on the 27th. We took her to surgery, put a scope in, then opened her. I found a bleeder off the right hepatic artery, or what I felt was the right hepatic, and I had religated the cystic artery.
You recall telling Dr. Hamilton anything else about the history?
I told her that Dr. Kottman had consulted. I believe I told her. Kottman had consulted N.J. Wright. She was on a ventilator in the intensive care unit. That she was stable during that day.
Do you remember telling Dr. Hamilton anything else about about Mrs. Mejia's history?
I cannot remember anymore, sir.
Okay. Now, with respect to the second surgery, I think you've actually covered some of that in what you told me here just a moment ago. Did you tell Dr. Hamilton that you thought the hepatic artery might have been injured in a fall?
I don't remember that, sir, though I probably did tell her that.
Okay. Did you tell her anything about her situation? And let me strike that. Did you tell Dr. Hamilton anything more about Mrs. Mejia's situation after the second surgery?
Yeah, I told her that I had Dr. Kottman see her, Dr. J. Wright. I might have told her that nephrology saw her. That she was doing fine, her hemoglobin was stable, along with the hematocrit. And that I believe I told her we were getting hemoglobins and hematocrits every 6 hours.
Did you tell her anything else about, for example, at this point was she on the ventilator?
She had been on the ventilator from the end of surgery till when I was taken off the case.
Why was she on a ventilator?
Dr. Kottman, if you read his consult and his recommendations, he also many times will keep a patient after a second surgery on the ventilator to allow them to recover a little bit better.
Did you tell Dr. Hamilton about why Mrs. Mejia was on a ventilator?
That I can't tell you, sir. I don't remember.
Okay. Why was nephrology involved?
I think it was Dr. Kottman who requested nephrology.
And why was that?
You would have to ask him.
Did you tell Dr. Hamilton at all about why nephrology was involved?
No, sir, I don't think, as I said, I don't think I did.
How about Dr. Wright? Did you tell Dr. Hamilton about anything Dr. Wright had been doing?
Probably not.
Did you share with Dr. Hamilton any concerns about what Mrs. Mejia might need as the day progressed, given her condition in the past?
No.
Did you discuss with Dr. Hamilton any future actions that would be taken in the course of her treatment?
No.
Did you discuss with Dr. Hamilton any aspects of any vital signs, symptoms, or signs that needed to be watched or monitored?
I don't recall that.
Did you discuss with Dr. Hamilton anything about the, any concerns about any continued bleeding for Mrs. Mejia?
No, sir.
Did you discuss any concerns with Dr. Hamilton about the need for any kind of interventional radiologist?
No.
Did you discuss with Dr. Hamilton any concerns about whether the University General Hospital Dallas had sufficient blood supplies on hand if Mrs. Mejia continued to bleed?
Not that I recall, sir.
Do you recall Dr. Hamilton raising any concerns or questions with you that we haven't talked about?
Not as far as I remember, sir.
Do you recall Dr. Hamilton talking with you at all about why your privileges had been revoked?
No.
Did you form the impression that she was aware that your privileges had been revoked?
Apparently she was told by Dr. Shada, and that's all I can tell you.
Did Dr. Hamilton indicate to you that she was assuming care of Mrs. Mejia?
She told me that Dr. Shada called her and told her she was assuming care.
Did she tell you that did Dr. Hamilton tell you that she had refused to assume care for Mrs. Mejia?
No, sir.
Did you form any impression in your mind that Dr. Hamilton had refused to take on the care of Mrs. Mejia?
No, she was very cordial, and that's all I can say.
We go back to that tone question. Is that what you remember about Dr. Hamilton's conversation with you on the 27th with respect to her tone?
I didn't perceive anything. She called me as an associate or a colleague, asked me, I told her.
Do you recall Dr. Hamilton expressing any concern about assuming the care of Mrs. Mejia?
No, sir.
Did you develop in your mind any feeling that Dr. Hamilton, had any reservations about assuming the care of Mrs. Mejia?
No, sir.
As an attending, would you agree that person is responsible for coordinating and overseeing the overall care of the patient?
Objection form.
Just ask that question again.
What do you perceive as the role of the attending physician for a particular patient?
Well, you're handling the case and problems that occur. You call the different specialists that you need to handle it. You go from there. You are expected to take care of the patient.
If Dr. Shada had not called you to remove your privileges and remove you from Mrs. Mejia's case, would you have continued to take those steps with respect to her?
Yes, sir.
If you understood that someone was assuming that role for you, would you expect that doctor to also take those responsibilities?
Yes, sir.
Why is that?
Because when the care is transferred, the total care is transferred. Now, if she wanted to give those opportunities to another person, that's her call. That's not mine.
if someone like Dr. Sade removes an attending physician from a patient, let me back up and ask it a different way. As the attending, you'd agree with me that that doctor plays an important role in the overall care of the patient, true?
Yes, sir.
If there was an attending present for Mrs. Mejia, would that doctor have had responsibilities for ensuring the types of monitoring, consults, and other care she would have needed?
Yes, sir.
If there is no attending assigned to a patient, who is responsible for overall control of the care like the attending would be?
Form.
There, you would always have an attending or not be in the hospital.
If you were removed, as you were in this case, by Dr. Shada as the attending, did you have an expectation that another doctor would be put in your place to be the attending physician?
He told me.
And you would expect that, correct?
Yes, sir.
Standard of care to do that?
Can't answer that.
Ever seen it not done in the years of your practice?
No, sir.
And without an attending, in your opinion, does that pose any risk of harm to the patient if there is no attending doctor in charge of the patient?
That patient would not be in the hospital.
What would you expect to have happen?
The patient would have to fend for themselves on the outside the hospital.
Okay. Now, with respect to call between yourself and Dr. Hamilton on the 27th, after that conversation, well, let me strike that. Have we now talked about everything you remember about the call between yourself and Dr. Hamilton on the 27th?
As far as I know,
Did you receive any other calls from anyone regarding Mrs. Mejia that day?
no. After 4:30, no, just Dr. Hamilton.
Right. Any texts or emails or other types of communications to any care provider involved in Mrs. Mejia's care?
No, sir.
Do you have any further role after the conversation with Dr. Hamilton about Mrs. Mejia? Did you have any further involvement in Mrs. Mejia's care?
No, sir.
Now, I understand that after she passed away, you were contacted about completing records for her. Do you remember that?
Yes, sir.
What do you recall about that?
Medical records called and asked me to dictate the discharge.
When did that occur?
I can't, what date was it, sir, on the dictated?
Let me give you
he's giving
the
you
two. I'm
something.
sorry. To test your recollection. And anytime you can't remember a date, just let me know and I'll see what I can do about finding a document to help you, sir. Let me show you Exhibit 3, which was the discharge summary, and I also want to show you Exhibit 8. I think you've got it.
Yeah.
You get your own copy of that?
Yeah, you can have that one. So can you tell me what Exhibit 8 is?
Well, on,
He wants to know if you know what that is.
yes, the progress note you're talking about.
I don't know what it's called, so
Well,
let's call it a progress note.
They had a list of patients to be signed out. And it was 10:15 a.m. They called my office. This was 22 days after her death, and said that they wanted me to do the discharge summary. I told them that I wasn't allowed to go to the hospital, that I couldn't do it. They called me back. I told them that I would do it up to the time that she or I was removed from the case, which I did. And I went from there.
So let me cut that up a little bit. with respect to Exhibit 8, do you know what the page itself is? And you'd said a progress note, but I don't
No,
recognize
this
as-
comes from medical records. It's totally different, comes off the computer.
Okay. Now, I see an entry regarding the patient name with Mrs. Mejia, and then attending physician with a code for you. Is that 365 your code or something? Or do you know?
I can't tell you.
All right. Then there's a number of other people underneath that. Tron, Chow, do you know who that is?
Yes, those are different people who had to sign different things.
Okay. And Dr. Andrew Richards, do you know what that is?
Yes, he is an attending at the hospital who was covering the original internist asked to see the patient.
And I meant to ask, with respect to Dr. Tron, do you know what?
He's an
involvement?
emergency room physician.
Okay, then we have your name, and there's a code DT, sign, date and time. Do you know what that reference is?
I don't know what DT is, dictate discharge summary.
And then underneath that is Dr. Sade.
No, that's Dr. Schotte's daughter.
Oh, do you know why she'd be involved in this document?
Can't tell you. She worked in medical records. She was the one that worked in medical records. His other daughter is married, and she was director of nurses.
What's her name?
I can't tell you. She's a very nice young lady.
Okay. Now, the handwriting below that, do you recognize the first entry that's 10:15 a.m. on the 22nd? Do you recognize who that is?
No, that's me, Dr. Bianco, but I don't know who signed it. And I don't know who BC is on the 23rd.
Okay, let me go back. The entry that's written there, is that your handwriting?
Nothing
B-
on here is my handwriting.
And with respect to the 10:15 on the 22nd of July, you don't recognize whomever has signed off on that, correct?
No.
And then the entry on the 23rd, you don't recognize who
No.
BC is, correct?
No.
So now let's go back. You were, however, you said, called by someone to complete a discharge summary. Did that take place on the 22nd of July?
Yes, they called the office and mentioned it to Becky. And I don't know if I was sitting in the office at the time and said that, or had Becky call back. I can't tell you.
And who was it that called the office to make this request to you?
Medical records?
Do you remember anything more about who at Medical Records?
No.
And you did refuse initially to do a discharge summary, correct?
Well, sir, I was taken off the case, removed from the hospital, and did not want to impose on anyone. I felt that whoever handled the case towards the end would do the discharge summary.
And who did you think that would be?
Dr. Hamilton.
For the reasons we've discussed before?
Yes, that she had taken over the case.
Now, what is a discharge summary?
It's a story that tells about the course of events during the hospital stay.
And I think it was exhibit, still may be in front of you, exhibit 3? That's your
Yes.
discharge summary? You did draft one for Mrs. Mejia, correct? And that's what you've got in front of you, exhibit 3?
Yeah,
Does that reflect the entire hospitalization for Mrs. Mejia?
no.
On the second page, did you write both of those two sentences?
I dictated them.
All right. the last sentence, at that point around 5 o'clock, I was removed from the case and the patient was to be cared for by another physician. You wrote that?
No, it dictated
Or dictated
it.
that?
Yes, sir.
And that other physician, again, is who?
Dr. Hamilton.
Did you expect that after being removed from the case, there would be an additional discharge summary for the many hours after this point?
I would have thought so.
Would the records be incomplete, in your opinion, if a discharge summary was not provided for the several hours after you were removed before she was taken out the following day?
I really don't think I can answer to it. Were I in medical records individual who was very familiar with that, I could answer it better. Yeah, I would expect someone would have dictated something following that.
Objection, non-responsive, but non-responsive portion.
Let me
Sorry.
go back and then ask it. Based on your work with University General Hospital and your practice with them for the time that you were there, would you have expected, sir, that a discharge summary would have been prepared by a doctor for the many hours after you were removed on the 27th up until Mrs. Mejia was removed on the 28th for the care involved in her treatment?
Objection form.
Form.
Okay, now I answer?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Why is that?
Well, it would have completed the discharge. It would have completed everything. That's all I can say.
All right. Off the record?
Sure.
Off the record, 12:25 PM.